The Mystery of the Mischievous Marker. A Mickey Wrangle Mystery. 1. This morning, I found myself sitting on the hot seat, the principal's office. I don't mind telling you, it was working the way it's meant to work. I was sweating bullets. A fifth grader is never summoned to Mrs. Abrago's office just for the fun of it. Kids get called in for one of two reasons. They're either selling chocolate bars as a fundraiser for the student council, it was common knowledge that Mrs. O was a sucker for the almond variety, or they've done something they shouldn't have been doing, and they got caught. I wasn't in the student council, so that told me I wasn't there because Mrs. O was looking to satisfy her craving for candy bars. For the life of me, though, I could not come up with a reason why else I was sitting in this very uncomfortable leather chair. I hadn't done anything that warranted being pulled out of homeroom the moment I set foot in the classroom anyway. I was trying to remain calm, to stay cool. First rule of interrogation that I learned from my online course on private investigative techniques was, to keep them guessing, play it like Baby Bear, not too cool, not too hot, but just right. Okay, that pertained to the one asking the questions, but I figured it applied to the one getting grilled, too. Try as I might to be cool as a cucumber, though, I could not help but be nervous and know the jitters were beginning to show, and the sweat streaming down my face, my left eye twitching and my slight rocking back and forth. Without knowing my crime, it was obvious on my face I'd done it, whatever it was. It didn't help either that as soon as she asked me to take a seat she shuffled some papers on her desk, and without looking at me, said, "Sit tight, Wrangle. I'll be right back." She got up, walked to the door, stood there a few moments without saying a word, sighed, then left me alone in her office. Did I say she left me all by myself? In her office? Part of her grand master plan, I was sure of it. If, as a private detective, I ever needed to find out some key information on a case from a meanie, I'd leave him alone, too. Let him stew. Which was all good and well when you were the one stepping out, not the one left behind. It was nerve-wracking. Making matters worse was that overhead, running approximately the length of her desk, was a row of track lights, each of the fixtures pointed strategically at my face. 'Cause number 2 for my sweating like an ice cube on a South Texas summer day. In other words, bucket loads. To help pass the time, to help keep myself from throwing my body onto the floor in a fetal position like a baby sucking his thumb, I studied my surroundings. Something else I learned from my online courses, get to know where you're at, because wherever you find yourself, there you are. There I was, and so, first, I surveyed her desk, the sort of desk one would expect to find in principals' offices around the world, on the dark side of cherry wood, but most likely not actual wood but particle board instead. Covering the top was a sheet of clear glass, under which she kept photos, mostly of her children, if I had to guess. One of a boy and a little girl during what I surmised to be Halloween, because the boy was decked out in a zombie outfit and the little girl was dressed as a pink unicorn, both of them carrying their jack-o'-lantern baskets. His was the hard orange plastic variety, hers a soft plush. Across the bottom of the photo the names Aaron and Bella were written in clean block letters on a sticky note, followed by the year. The other photos were of the family and friends kind. Nothing really stuck out except for the one of the kids, which reminded me of mine and Ricky's Halloween this past year. I had made an oversized stool out of cardboard. I had cut a hole on the seat to fit my head through. Ricky, my twin brother, dressed like a pigeon, though most people where we trick-or-treated mistook him for a turkey. They just didn't get the joke. More times than not, we had to explain it. You see, I'm a stool, Ricky's a pigeon. So, we're a stool pigeon. Get it? You know, the bad guy in crime novels who's a tattletale? It was really disappointing after all the work we put into our costumes. I think we decided that if we go out next Halloween, we'd dress up as superheroes. In addition to the papers Mrs. A had shuffled earlier, there were also a stapler on the desk, a nameplate and a letter opener that looked like a mini-sword. The stack of papers was face down, close enough for me to take a peek if I were curious like a cat with all 9 lives to spare. I still had no idea why I was there, so I wasn't taking any chances. However, I'd arm myself with every other possible detail available to me. The plants on each side of the window right behind her chair were fake, and by the looks of them, shiny like they were, Mrs. O was a clean freak. Most of those do nothing but gather dust. Hanging from the walls were the appropriate number and kinds of framed items, diplomas, pictures of Mrs. A shaking hands with important-looking people, certificates, awards, and a crayon-based piece of artwork, the sort my mother kept on the fridge to this day from Ricky's in my younger days. I was tempted to take a closer look at her diplomas to see for myself when and where she graduated, and just as I was shifting my weight onto my feet to stand, the doorknob turned with a slight squeak. Then the door opened wide. I collapsed back into my chair. From the look on her face, I knew I was done for. I felt like a stuck pig at a barbecue convention. 2. Mrs. Abrego sat behind her desk, flipped the stack of papers from earlier, rifled through them, reordered a few, all the while saying nothing. Long moments passed. The light seemed brighter and hotter on my face now that she was back. I tried not to, but I couldn't help swallowing hard and loud. The longer the silence, the bigger the crime, I thought. All I could come up with under this pressure was the spitball fight on the bus from this morning. I needed a plan of attack, and fast, but my mind was sluggish. I'd never been on this side of the interrogation before. I had no clue how to devise said plan of attack. So, said Mrs. A, training her gaze on me, finally. With those eyes leveled right at me now, I actually preferred the long quiet without her looking at me. You must be wondering why I've called you to my office, she said. She was deadly cold in her approach. Such a pro. I knew if this took any longer, I would crack like a nut. I'd confess to whatever she accused me of. And oh, that stare. Now my right leg was betraying me, too. It was shaking noticeably. Sort of, I said. To be honest, I've been going over in my head what I could have possibly done, what trouble I could have gotten into to merit being called to your office, ma'am. Although there was that spitball incident from this morning on the bus, it was only just this morning and mostly between Ricky and me, so word couldn't have reached you so quickly, and even if it had, I would argue that my actions weren't so bad that. I stopped mid-sentence when I saw her reach for a pen and then begin taking notes. What I mean to say, ma'am, is, no, I can't think of anything, period. I mean, yes, ma'am, I have been wondering why you would call me here. There was a slight smile on her face, though it didn't have to be one. It could have been just that look all principals share, the stern smirk used to confuse students. She laid down the pen and leaned back in her chair. It squeaked like the door had. No matter the outcome, I'd have to recommend squirting a bit of oil on them. Unless, of course, it was part of her principal's ruse, a means of throwing students off balance with the annoying screeches. She was a wily one, this Mrs. A. Well, she said, never mind about the, spitball episode, at least for now. Again with the smile/smirk. As to why I've asked you to my office, Mr. Wrangle, she continued, may I call you Mickey? Certainly, ma'am, I said, maybe a little too eagerly. But I needed to get her on my side, especially when I didn't know my crime. She looked briefly at the papers, then back at me with a soft, sad face this time. Mickey, I'm sure you've seen the graffiti marring our walls lately. Of course, we try and have them cleaned up before any of you get a chance to see the ugliness, but you can't get rid of the marker completely. Anyhow, the substance of the messages, aimed primarily at me, is fairly harmless. I'm a principal, after all, so I've grown a thick skin over the years, sticks and stones, you know? What is bothersome beyond belief, though, is that someone thinks so very little of our school that they would show such disrespect. Not just to me, but to all of us. I'm proud of our school, Mickey. I count myself fortunate to be principal here. So it's heartbreaking when something like this happens. She shook her head, and for the first time since looking at me she dropped her eyes. It all of a sudden hit me why I was here. I partway stood. Mrs. Abrego, you don't think that you can't believe me? She snapped her head up, leaned forward, put a hand to her heart and she shook her other one. Oh, goodness, no, Mickey. I'm sorry I haven't been clear. Please, sit. I did. She leaned back, too. No, I don't think for a second you have anything to do with this ugliness. When my racing mind slowed down and I was able to process what Mrs. A had just said, I sighed in relief. Then a split moment later, I asked, so, then why am I here, if you don't mind me asking? Am I right in saying you're a sort of detective, young though you are? Actually, Mrs. Abrego, I said, I'm the real deal. I've taken several online courses. I took and passed every one of their tests, and they sent me a certificate, which I've got at home, framed if you want to see it. I pulled my wallet from my back pocket, removed my private eye ID card, and reached across the desk as far as my 5th grade arm could reach to show it to her. I've got a badge, too. Want to see? She took it from me, scanned it briefly, turned it over for an even shorter time, then handed it to me. That's very impressive, Mickey. Thank you, ma'am. But I still don't understand why I'm here. Mickey, she said, I'll be frank with you. I was so tempted to say, and I'll be surely with you, but I thought this would be the absolutely wrong time for my joke. So I kept my mouth shut for the time being. She continued, I'm in a bit of a sticky situation. She grabbed the stack of papers, stood, and walked to the window overlooking the playground, a blacktop covered in hopscotch and 4 square courts, a couple of basketball hoops, and not much else. It's where we played ultimate dodgeball during P2. It was her turn to sigh. After what looked like thinking hard on her part, she invited me to the window. I made my way around her desk to the window and stood beside her, looking at the pre-K classes running around in circles with multicolored streamers flitting from their chubby fists. Mrs. A then said, Take a good look out this window with me, Mickey, and tell me what you see. I'm not sure what you mean, ma'am. For instance, she said, do you see Mr. Button out there scrubbing the wall? I nodded. His bright orange janitor's supply cart was parked right beside him. He'd be hard to miss. If you look closer, you'll see he's trying to get rid of the latest message, but to no avail. That one wheel. Have to paint over, it looks like. You can still read it, can't you? I read it aloud, our principal's no pal of nobodies. It was interesting spelling and punctuation choices this mischievous marker had made. It hadn't taken me but an instant to come up with a nickname for the baddie, and just like that, I knew why I was here. Mrs. A needed my help in finding out who the culprit was so she could clean up the school, so to speak. I take it you noticed the errors in grammar and punctuation. It should read principal, ending in pal, not ple. Major difference, as you well should know if you've been paying attention in Mrs. Garza's English class. I had been, and then some. I added, that is the most obvious error, ma'am. But there's also the nobody, that is spelled as though it were plural, ending in is, though to the trained eye, which mine is, the word is only made to look like the plural form of the word, though it should be singular. And though there is an apostrophe, it's in the wrong position. Errors abound. I was enjoying analyzing everything wrong with the message. I was eager for her to ask me to join, if not outright lead, her investigative team. I felt I'd more than proven my mettle in this short time. So many clues. I said. Oh, is that a B at the bottom right corner, almost